It's the 1970s in Los Angeles. The times are fast and fun, and the beaches and clubs are filled with people hanging out and doing disco. While all this is going on, one person in particular seems to be enjoying her lifestyle very much. This young woman is living in a nice apartment with a jacuzzi, hanging out with her friends at Venice Beach, using recreational drugs, and enjoying the nightlife. However, she's only a single mother with only a small job, so the question has to be asked, how can she afford to live this lifestyle? Well, she's able to live this way because she is a welfare queen who makes money off of cheating the system. She's had 4 previous pregnancies, which she received benefits from before having them aborted, and now receives benefits from her current child. As for her nice apartment, she was able to keep that by avoiding a meeting with a social worker. Also, she makes extra money by selling tangible benefits like food and medical stamps on the black market, and then uses that money to go out, buy clothes, party, and enjoy life on the beach. While this may seem like an extreme scenario, it demonstrates many of the faults with our current welfare system. The poverty situation in America is currently being responded to with a state-sponsored welfare system, and while it can be abused, there are many who argue that a humane society should provide some sort of welfare for its people. But is this true? Has the modern state-driven system actually helped? Because of this, I would like to argue that the modern welfare system is detrimental to our society. Now, before we get to my arguments, it's important to get our historical bearings. Welfare, which the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines as, quote, aid in the form of money or necessities for those in need, end quote, goes all the way back to the beginnings of the early church. As we see in Acts chapter 2 of the day of Pentecost, where over 3,000 were saved and baptized, the scene described where, quote, all the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. And we see here the basic foundations of welfare, given to those as they have need. And by the 3rd century, we see welfare as part of the church's self-identity. In his book, Atheist Delusions, David Bentley Hart goes over how the Byzantine church made huge contributions to welfare through the building of hospitals. He writes, quote, it was once fashionable among historians of medicine to claim that until quite recently, hospitals were little more than hospices and shelters, offering nothing like systematic medical treatment and making no particular effort to heal their patients. It is clear now, though, that in the Eastern Christian Roman worlds, as early as the 6th century and probably earlier, there were free hospitals served by physicians and surgeons with regular and trained staff. We see here the Christian precursor to programs like Medicare and Medicaid, and the church continues to do this all throughout history. And we see the modern form of welfare begin to take shape in colonial America. In his book, The Tragedy of American Compassion, Marvin Olasky gives a good overview of the early methods of the welfare programs. People who were in poverty by no fault of their own were taken in by compassionate families or individuals who tried to feed them, clothe them, and get them back to work. This was based off a sincere love of the fellow man, and the church still had a very large role in it. Those who were able to work, but too lazy to do so themselves, did not receive aid, but instead were ministered to in order to change their attitude towards working. This demonstrated the principle of withholding charity at times so that it can't be abused. Around this time, a local preacher named Cotton Mather talked to his congregation about this, warning them to, quote, not abuse your charity by misapplying it, end quote. Olasky makes a good point here about this, saying that, quote, the difference between Mather's restraint and our exuberance indicates the difference between dominant views of human nature then and now. Mather did not assume that men and women naturally wanted to work, end quote. These programs did not try to spoon-feed the poor, as it would only worsen their situations. However, we see this attitude towards poverty shift, first in the Great Depression around the 1930s, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt enacted his New Deal, and shift even further in the 1960s, where President Lyndon B. Johnson started his Great Society campaign. Both of these eras saw the introduction and expansion of modern state-sponsored welfare. As a consequence of this, the church was further marginalized from social and economic progress. Now, this modern state-sponsored form of welfare begs a few questions. Can the state take over a church function without severely altering that function? How have our attitudes changed as the state takes over welfare? How have the attitudes of the poor changed? What if, by making the church irrelevant, other institutions such as family and community also become irrelevant? And what if the state depersonalized welfare in such a way that facilitated an abuse of the system? Because of these questions, I'd like to argue that the modern welfare system is detrimental to our society, and I will argue this based on 3 points. The modern welfare system destroys the responsibility we have to the poor as Christians. It has a negative effect on the family, and is easily abused. The first argument is that the modern welfare system destroys our responsibility we have to the poor as Christians. Now, you see, what the church was doing all the way through the mid-1900s was based off of a sincere love for those in need. These welfare programs were based off of compassion and not compulsion, and most of the time, money was not the main source of aid. Instead, people gave up their time and resources by taking in the needy, feeding them, clothing them, and trying to help them get back to work. This approach made the system personal, as people were directly involved in helping the needy. Now, if we look back to this motive, we see that it goes all the way back to the Byzantine era of the church. In a book by Demetrios Konstantelos entitled Byzantine Philanthropy and Social Welfare, he writes about the ancient Byzantine motive behind philanthropy, saying, quote, "If we were to ask a Byzantine what prompted him to believe in and apply philanthropia, he would have answered the following terms. Blessed are they who are merciful, they shall obtain mercy. Blessed is he who considers the poor and the beggar. He who is charitable to the poor lends to the Lord." End quote. We see that what the church was doing all this time was not simply serving the poor, but serving God as well. The church truly believed that this was part of our responsibility as the church, and truly tried to embody that. Now, we see this attitude shift with the rise of the modern welfare system. And today, we see welfare as depending on what the government can do and what you can do as an individual. Now, because of this view, we see 2 things develop in society. We see the attitude of entitlement among our poor communities, and the professionalization of welfare in general. Now, this attitude of entitlement we see amongst the poor is largely due to the nature of modern federal aid. This system freely hands out money while you stay in your impoverished condition, no matter if you try to find work or not. And because of this, we see an attitude of entitlement come up amongst the poor, and they lose the sense of gratitude that comes when receiving aid while trying to help them. Now, this is exactly what Cotton Mather warned. We have given too much and it has become abused. Now, the modern welfare system also creates the professionalization of welfare in general. Now, today, this is where it focuses on what the government and nonprofit agencies can do for the poor, and not what we can do ourselves. This is largely due to the nature of compulsion in our modern system. Money comes out of our taxes to go to programs like Medicaid, which was preceded by the church setting up hospitals for free. And because of this modern system, the Christian view towards poverty in general is deteriorating, and the church is not able to do as much as it should for the poor. So we see through the shift in the attitude of, again, towards poverty, the attitude of entitlement and the personalization of welfare, the modern system destroys our responsibility that we have to the poor as Christians. Secondly, the modern welfare system has a very negative effect on the family. And this is again due to the nature of entitlement that we see amongst our poor communities. Because the system freely hands out money to those who need it, the recipients aren't motivated to provide for themselves or their families. And this attitude becomes transferred to the children of welfare families. Because if their parents aren't to work for anything, the children are not taught to work for anything themselves either. The effects of this system are shown in a report by Robert Rector and Patrick Fagan entitled How Welfare Harms Kids. In the report, it shows that, quote, welfare dependency as a child has a negative effect on the earnings and employment capacity of young men. The more welfare income received by a boy's family during his childhood, the lower the boy's earnings will be as an adult, even when compared to boys in families with identical non-welfare income, end quote. And we see the effects of the system go even further than that, as children on welfare are 3 times likely to go to jail, 3 times as likely to have children out of wedlock, and twice as likely to have developmental and behavioral problems growing up. More problems of the system come from the absence of one or both parents in situations. This is caused by illegitimacy, which is unfortunately promoted by our welfare system. For example, in an article in Time magazine, in Wall Street Journal, by Jason Riley, entitled "The State Against Blacks," he shows how the modern system is slowly destroying the African American family. In it, he writes, quote, "During the Reconstruction and up until the 1940s, 75 to 85% of black children lived in 2-parent families. Today, more than 70% of black children are born to single women." And now, we see this not only affects the African American family, but the white family as well, as shown in an article in Time magazine by Barbara Reinrich entitled "Welfare, a White Secret." In it, she writes, quote, "If we look at the kind of persons most likely to be eligible, single mothers living in poverty with children under 18 to support, we find little difference in welfare participation by race. 74.6% of African Americans in such dire straits are on welfare, as compared to the 64.5% of the poor white single moms." End quote. Now, we see here that this system allows a single-parent home to perpetuate and the condition of the traditional family to diminish. Now, we see because of these attitudes of entitlement among welfare children and the perpetuation of single-parent homes, that the modern welfare system has a very negative effect on the family. And thirdly, the modern welfare system is detrimental to our society because it is easily abused. While the system has good intent by giving money to those who need it, most of the recipients take this money and spend it on things that got them in this situation in the first place. And in response to this abuse, laws are passed that completely get rid of any aid without trying to fix those who are abusing the system or try to help those who are victims of these vices. The most common abuse of the modern welfare system is taking the money received to buy things like illicit drugs. This has been a very controversial issue, and many states have been considering passing drug testing laws in order for recipients to be eligible for welfare assistance. Florida in particular has taken action against this, as last year Governor Rick Scott signed a bill that will require drug testing for all welfare applicants in order to be eligible for assistance. And this response is indicative of a broken system. And while it's only a small problem, it still shouldn't be happening. And not only is the abuse of the system indicative of a problem, but the response to it as well. According to the bill that Governor Scott signed, if an applicant tests positive for drug use, they will not be eligible for benefits for over a year. And if it is positive a second time, they will not be eligible for 3 years. And this is a response that is completely lacking of any compassion and is not trying to help fix the people who are abusing the system or correct those vices. As we see in early in Thesis, this is not always the case. Early forms of welfare try to minister to those who are victims of vices like substance abuse and try to help them get back to work. So as we see, through the abuse of the system and the response to this abuse, that the modern welfare system is easily abused. Now, while I have shown that the modern welfare system destroys the responsibility we have for as Christians, is detrimental to the family, and is easily abused, there are some who would still argue against my thesis and say that the modern welfare system is actually beneficial. Now, the first argument for this is that the modern system allows us to exercise our freedom as Americans. In an article entitled "Welfare of the Community" by Joseph Westfall, an argument for this position is shown. In it, he writes, quote, "But freedom, argue welfare proponents, means nothing if people do not have the ability to exercise it. To do that, they need a minimum level of well-being. This position proceeds from a conviction that people have dignity based on their ability to choose. And as a minimum condition for that, for making those choices, people need their basic needs met." End quote. First of all, there are a few problems with this argument. The author's materialism, first of all, is hardly disguised. We do not have dignity based off of choice, but the fact that we are all made in the image of God. But further to the point, the modern welfare system is not the way to go about meeting people's basic needs. As you have seen earlier in my thesis, the modern welfare system is hurting those recipients who take part in it, and people on welfare aren't motivated to provide for themselves, lose the wonder of gratitude, and this in turn breaks down the structure of community. Now, a second argument for the modern system is that if the government does not provide for those in poverty, who will? In an argument entitled Defending Welfare, Russell Madden writes about a debate among his college students concerning the abolition of welfare. The resolution for this debate was that welfare for both individual citizens and businesses should be abolished. And the pro-welfare side won due to the lack of strength in the pro-resolution arguments. Now, during the rebuttal phase, Madden writes, quote, "The con side hammered away on the notion of need. What will these people do if welfare is abolished?" they asked. How can you punish innocent children and single mothers who need these benefits? Who will help them if the government doesn't? And on and on and on. And in answer to this question, I would say that the church should be able to step in and help those who are in need. As we have observed earlier, in colonial America, all the way back to the Byzantine era, individuals led by the church stepped in to help those in poverty without being compelled by the government. And it is possible to achieve this today if the church was educated in order to take on the responsibility that it has towards the poor. Now, in conclusion, I have been able to show that the modern welfare system is detrimental to our society because of its destruction of our responsibility to the poor we have as Christians, its negative effect on the family, and the fact that it is easily abused. I have also been able to refute all opposing arguments and show that it stands in spite of them. And we've been able to show that the modern welfare system is unable to fulfill its purpose in helping those in poverty. And my thesis has a very unlikely ally. Do you remember that welfare queen we saw in the 70s? If you look at her life now, you see a very different picture, as she is now a very respected and well-known political activist who is pushing for major welfare reform. Her name is Star Parker, and after a great conversion experience, she's become one of the biggest names in the fight for welfare reform. And she currently runs the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, or CURE, a foundation that she started that is fighting poverty and restoring dignity through faith, freedom, and personal responsibility. She is living proof that the modern welfare system not only is detrimental, but that through faith and responsibility it can be overcome.